Networking often feels awkward, stressful, and overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be. In this episode of the Advancing Excellence podcast, host Janice Clines, marketing manager for AOE, sits down with Michelle Gilbert, Chief Engine Officer of Purple Engine Coaching and Consulting, to discuss proven strategies that transform networking from a dreaded chore to a meaningful connection. Learn how to join conversations, keep them engaging, and make every interaction count. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Advancing Excellence podcast, where we explore actionable insights to help professionals and leaders excel in their careers and drive meaningful change. I'm your host, Janice Clines, marketing manager for AOE, and I couldn't be more excited about today's episode. Networking. For so many of us, just hearing that word can spark feelings of awkwardness or even dread. But why is that? And how can we shift our perspective to make networking not only enjoyable, but also authentic and effective? To help us tackle this topic, we're joined by someone who truly knows the ins and outs of leadership and meaningful connection, Michelle Gilbert. Michelle is the Chief Engine Officer of Purple Engine Coaching and Consulting. After an incredible 34-year career in public relations and corporate communications, 24 of those years at Fortune 50 companies, Michelle founded Purple Engine Coaching to help high-performing leaders overcome their toughest challenges, from delivering constructive feedback to influencing effectively and staying composed under immense pressure. Now a certified executive coach, Michelle empowers leaders to show up with more confidence, build stronger relationships, and drive growth for themselves and their organizations. Her depth of experience and genuine passion for helping others makes her the perfect guest for today's discussion. Michelle, welcome to the Advancing Excellence podcast.
Thank you so much, Janice. I'm thrilled to be here and to have a conversation about what I agree with you is a very important topic.
Well, we're thrilled to have you. Before we jump in, I want to take a moment to thank our listeners and thank them for joining us. Whether you're commuting, at your desk, or taking a moment to unwind, we're so glad you're here, and we hope you'll walk away with fresh ideas and actionable takeaways. Now, Michelle, let's get started. We've all heard how crucial it is to network, but for many people, it's not exactly their favorite thing to do. Why do you think so many people feel awkward or even dread networking? What's behind that resistance?
That's a really thoughtful question. And I think it's important to understand what's behind that resistance before we can feel more at ease with networking. And for a lot of people, it comes down to things like fear of rejection. I always say it takes us back to middle school and high school where we're afraid to sit at the lunch table by ourselves. It's not knowing what to say, or it's just feeling like it's awkward or even a little bit cringy. And in my experience, the biggest reason people dread networking is because they're simply not prepared. And that preparation starts well before you park your car. When you take the time to get clear on your goals, think about who you want to connect with, and even plan a few conversation openers, the whole experience will become more intentional, and that leads to less stress.
You talk about networking as having a life cycle, which I find so interesting. Can you walk us through what you mean by that?
Absolutely. A lot of people focus on what happens at the event, but that's just one part of the picture. There are actually three key stages which make up the networking life cycle. So it's before, during, and after. And each of these stages plays an important role. So what you do ahead of time sets the tone. What happens in the moment helps you build connections. And what you do after the event is really where relationships start to take shape.
That just makes so much sense. Preparation really sets the tone. What are some key things people should do before they even walk into a room full of new faces?
You're right. Preparation is everything. And the first step is to set a realistic goal for yourself. So, for example, maybe you want to have three meaningful conversations, or maybe you want to reconnect with a former colleague or client, or get a couple minutes with the CEO of your organization. So, whatever it is, having that clear, attainable goal, it gives you a sense of purpose for being there, and it makes it easier to stay focused on what you want to accomplish at the event. Another thing you can do is if there's an RSVP list, do a little bit of homework ahead of time. Look through the names, prioritize who you want to connect with. And if it feels right, reach out to them ahead of time on LinkedIn with a short personal note. It's a really great way to warm up the conversation before you get to the event. Another thing you can do is think about how you'll introduce yourself and tailor it to the audience that you're going to be with. Keep it super simple. Focus on who you help and what you help them with. And then finally, brainstorm a few conversation starters because the worst time to come up with what you want to say is right before you have to say it.
So we've done our prep work and now we're stepping into the event itself. For many people, this is where the nerves kick in. What are some of the biggest challenges you see people facing during the event?
You're right, Janice. This is usually the moment when the nerves kick in, even for people who've done their prep. The good news is if you've set a clear goal, if you've thought about who you want to meet, and you have a few conversation starters ready, you've already taken a lot of that pressure off. But even with all of that, one common challenge that I see is knowing how to keep a conversation going once it's started. And my best advice is to be genuinely curious. That means asking those open ended questions and really listening to what the other person is saying. And if you're tuning into what they're saying and being present, those follow up questions will come naturally and the conversation will flow much more easily.
So you mentioned breaking into conversations, which I know can feel extremely intimidating. Any tips for people who see a group already talking and just don't know how to join in?
Yes, this is super common, and I completely understand. It can feel really intimidating to walk up to a group that's already deep into conversation. So, my advice is to look for clusters that aren't physically closed off. If there's a little bit of space in the circle, that's usually a sign that others are welcome to join in. I always say, walk up, smile, make eye contact, and say something simple like, "Do you mind if I join you?" Or just introduce yourself. I can't promise you that it's not going to feel a little bit awkward, but honestly, it's better to take that approach than to stand off on the side and wait for that perfect moment or to wait for somebody to come up to you. I actually know someone who has a really great strategy. I loved this when she told it to me, and I promised her I was going to share it with others. She finds a group that's laughing the most. She walks right up to them with a smile on her face and she says, "Okay, I have to know what's so funny." And it tends to disarm people, but it also shows them that this person has confidence. And most of the time, people are more than happy to bring her into the conversation and to pick up where they left off with what was so funny. So the key really is people are really more open than we think. Sometimes we just have to take a deep breath and make that first move.
I couldn't agree more. And what about the other side of the coin? If you're stuck in a conversation going nowhere, how can you exit without seeming rude?
I hear this question all the time, and honestly, it's a lot easier than most people think. Keep it this in mind. This is a networking event. Nobody expects you to stay in one conversation all night long. So you can simply say something like, "I have really enjoyed talking with you. I'm going to circulate a bit more." Or, "I promised myself I was going to meet a few new people tonight. It was so great chatting with you." These approaches are very polite, they're very respectful, and it keeps things moving.
That's great advice. What's the biggest mistake you see people making when it comes to networking?
This is such a good question. Honestly, the biggest mistake that I see is when people try to sell themselves or their services way too soon. I always compare it this way. So, when you go to a first date, how often have you left with a marriage proposal? Not very often, right? Going to a networking event and expecting to walk out closing a deal, it's like trying to get married on that first date. A networking event gives you the opportunity to get to know someone and maybe even start liking them, but that trust takes a lot longer to establish. And when we focus on being curious, finding that common ground, and having a genuine exchange in our conversation, we're laying the foundation for developing a relationship. And that's what opens the door to future opportunities without that awkward feeling like you're hard selling someone.
That's such great advice. And it leads perfectly into my next question. How can people talk about themselves without sounding like they're bragging or trying to sell you something?
Well, this is another common fear that people have. People worry all the time that they're going to sound like they're bragging or selling. But here's the thing, talking about what you do doesn't have to feel like a TED Talk or a Shark Tank pitch. The key is to focus on who you help and how you help them. So let me give you my own personal example. Instead of saying, I'm a leadership coach, I might say something like, I help leaders tackle the hardest and the messiest parts of leadership with confidence and influence so that they earn more respect and trust from their colleagues and their teams. It's clear, it's conversational, and it gives the other person something to connect with. Most importantly, though, I'm not telling them that until they ask me for that information. So you're not reciting your resume, you're creating a moment of shared understanding. And let's be honest, every leader has struggled to manage people, and every employee has had a leader who makes things harder than they need to be. So I keep my introduction very clear, concise, and relatable.
So we all know networking doesn't end when the event does. This is where the third stage of the life cycle kicks in, right? So
Absolutely.
the follow up, that's what is next. What are some practical ways people can authentically keep the connection going after the first meeting?
Absolutely. Follow up is where the real magic happens, I like to say. It's the third and the final stage of the networking life cycle, but it often gets overlooked. The key is to be timely and personal. So, for example, right after the event, send a quick message, whether that's a LinkedIn note or an email, reminding the person of who you are and something specific that you talked about. It shows you're really paying attention and that you value their connection. The other thing is if you can share something relevant based on the conversation that you had, like an article, a book recommendation, or even a podcast, or even an introduction to someone who might be helpful to them. This is really thoughtful follow-up. It shows that you were paying attention to what they were saying. And if you think about it, ultimately follow-up is building a relationship. So when you make it authentic and meaningful, you can turn that brief encounter into a lasting connection.
So that's my next question. Once you've followed up, how do you transition from a one time meeting into a true professional relationship?
Great question. Moving from that single meeting to a true professional relationship, it takes ongoing attention and general interest. You're not going to necessarily get that first meeting or get that sale at your first coffee chat. So I recommend after your initial follow up, make it a habit to check in with them periodically, whether that's sharing another article or podcast based on what you talked about, maybe engaging with their LinkedIn content if they're super active. Pay attention if they've been had a recent achievement or promotion and congratulate them, or just sending them a quick note to see how things are going. Look for these ways to provide value without expecting anything in return. I always like to say, give before you expect to get. Maybe you can connect them with someone in your network or even help offer them your own helpful resources based on what your expertise is. And then in tune with what's happening in their world, whether it's at work, whether it's a new project they're doing, or even a personal milestone. When you show that you're paying attention, you're going to build that trust and deepen the connection naturally over time.
So, this has been such an enlightening conversation, Michelle. Is there one mindset shift you could encourage our audience to take away when it comes to networking? What would it be?
This is a great question, and I'll probably have a hard time sticking with just one mindset shift. But here's what I would say, Stop treating networking like a sales pitch or a to-do list. Instead, I want you to think about it as just building real relationships where both sides win. And when you focus on giving, listening, and truly, genuinely connecting with people, everything is going to change. And networking will go from being a stressful task to something that you can actually look forward to. That mindset is going to be a total game changer, not only for your career, but for your overall confidence.
And Michelle, my very last question for you today, is there any information that you have for our listeners that they can download or link to that will be in this podcast description?
Great question, Janice. Yeah, I actually put together a one pager that has tips for each of the three stages of the life cycle of networking. And I would be happy to share this with any of your listeners as well as you. Visit me on LinkedIn and I will get you the link so that you can download it.
Michelle, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today. I've learned so much, and I'm sure our listeners have too.
Thank you so much, Janice. It's really been a pleasure to be with you.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to Advancing Excellence. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you found this conversation helpful, share it with someone in your network who might benefit from Michelle's insights. Until next time, keep striving for excellence and fostering connections that help you and others grow.
Thank you so much for joining us. We hope this session provides value, and we hope you will join us for our next podcast.